So this video is my reaction to the second half of a video that I looked at the other day. I split it into two sections because I realised halfway through that it was actually two separate people talking. So this is the second person who spoke on this video. I had contemplated whether or not to do this second half because he's a little bit more clued in than the first guy. But then I thought, well, it would probably be about time that I did another more positive video because some of the most recent ones I've looked at have had some kind of dumb wits in them where I've just found myself rolling my eyes and thinking, what are these people talking about? So in that regard, I think this guy is a little bit more clued in. So let's have a look at what he's got to say.
I remember riding my bike and I was thinking, I wonder if this can get any worse. And the next thing I knew, this foot just flew past my head. And apparently some guy driving past me stuck his foot out the window, his whole leg. And I don't know if he was trying to kick me in the head as he went by or something, but that's what it seemed like. I'm not sure if he thought that through though, because I would probably hurt him pretty bad as well.
Yep, welcome to Australia, where people are so laid back that they don't realise how much of a dumbass they are when they travel in a car with their feet sticking out the window to cool off. I'm pretty sure what this guy encountered was in fact just your typical Aussie bogan who had no concept of the fact that A, he was putting himself in danger, and B, he might have been putting other pedestrians or road users in danger also.
I don't think I ever went in a house that had a basement in Australia.
So he does mention that he was in the northern part of Australia, so I'm guessing that the majority of places that he stayed were probably built up so that there was airflow underneath the house. In terms of basements, I guess we don't really have basements per se. Some houses might have like rumpus rooms underneath if they happen to be built on a hill. So you have, the main living area up above, and then because they're built on a hill, they'll have other rooms underneath. But they're not exactly like what I would envisage as being a basement, where, my notion of a basement is those kind of dark, dingy, dungeony kind of things that you see on television and movies and stuff. So, yeah, not so much. Maybe, like I said, rumpus rooms underneath. But, yeah, probably true. We don't have basements.
The houses seem really, really expensive. There'd be a house very average size, but because of the location or because of it being in Sydney, it would be close to $1 million or even over $1 million.
Now, obviously, for those of us who are Australian who are watching this, we can translate what he said into him talking about the fact that he is referring only to houses in the Sydney area as being expensive. Because other areas in Australia, the houses aren't necessarily hugely expensive. There are areas that, for some, are affordable in terms of house prices. But he doesn't really clarify that. He does sort of partway through talk about houses in Sydney, but I think he probably meant, on the whole, I think what he was talking about was just Sydney housing prices and not the rest of Australia. Well, obviously he doesn't know about the rest of Australia.
The roads in Sydney are really, really interesting. I felt like I was in traffic a lot. It seems like sometimes that they put the buildings in first and then realized, oh, we got to put roads in. So they just tossed them in on top. And so you've got all these different kinds of roads, and some of them are dead ends, some of them twist in interesting ways that I've never seen before. But
I am going to say, as someone who's not from Sydney, I find driving in Sydney to be hugely, hugely stressful. Just the amount of traffic is insane. And yeah, the roads are a bit confusing. You need to hope that your GPS is actually keeping track and not lagging, because there's nothing worse than ending up in the wrong lane or missing a turn off, and then you're going to have to go for another half an hour to get back en route. So yeah, I think he's right about that. In terms of the streets being built, the streets and the housing or something being built randomly or something. I think, well, for starters, you've got the older areas of Sydney that weren't designed for modern day traffic. They were established in the 1800s, and, well, they weren't had no idea about traffic in those days. And I also remember something that my dad used to say quite often, and that is that um, Sydney would be quite nice if it was ever finished. In other words, referring to the amount of building works that was going on there and everything. I don't know if that is still applicable, but definitely you're looking at the biggest city in Australia, the most hugely populated city in Australia, and yeah, because of that, the traffic is insane.
It was definitely a learning experience. Not only do you drive on the wrong side of the road, wrong side of the car, but the roads are very narrow and they've got some interesting curves to them. Time for Thai restaurant. Thai food. It was the best restaurant of my life. It's really diverse and the food's the same way. In my first area, obviously I had to learn how to use chopsticks. So that was new. I'd never used them before in my life.
I think sometimes we take for granted the amount of Asian influence when it comes to food and stuff in Australia, because we do have a lot of Asian restaurants of all sorts. It's just, part of our population, part of our multiculturalism. And this guy is apparently from Utah. He's like one of those Mormon missionaries, apparently. So clearly, he's never had the experience of eating any sort of Asian style food anywhere. So I just found that quite interesting that he's never learnt to use chopsticks. Just a quick aside, those of you who are familiar with my channel probably already are aware of this already, but I have dogs who like to snore very loud, and I have a cat who likes to get into everything and likes to play with all sorts of crazy things. So the noise in the background right now is she's somehow gotten hold of a bead that she is clattering all around the house and picking up and dropping and just having a great time with. So that's the noise in the background. I've learnt that if I tried to wait for my animals to be silent, I would never get any content created.
My second area, there was a lot of islander food. They like to feed you a lot, so it's easy to gain weight in an area like that. I remember eating jellyfish tentacles once. That was interesting. Kind of like chewing on rubber bands with flavor. That's what it felt like.
Kudos to him for being willing to try whatever foods he was given. And I find it so amusing that he's talking about these different types of islander foods that were unusual. And he's not saying that it was horrible, he's just saying it tasted like a rubber band with flavour. So he's trying to be quite positive in the way he talks. And yet, if you look at that other video from a few weeks ago where there was an American couple came to Australia with their 4 kids, and they claimed that out of their family of 6 people, only one person liked meat pies. And they were quite condescending in the way they spoke about it. So, kudos to this guy. He's clearly come from a better upbringing than the people in that video that I looked at a few weeks ago.
They had an interesting sort of cake that was called Pavlova. I've never seen anything like it before. If you were to make a cake out of cotton candy, in my opinion, it would be kind of like that.
I like that analogy, that it's kind of like a cake made with cotton candy. When you look at the amount of caster sugar that goes into making a pav, then yeah, he's probably not too far off. Obviously, cotton candy has a lot of added crap to the sugar before it becomes cotton candy. So you do have your colour additives and God knows what else. But yeah, we're still talking a super, super sweet dessert, I guess. The difference, of course, being your cream and your fruit on top.
And they also have meat pies a lot. They have pies and they put meat inside of them, all different kinds. Really good. And if you ever get the chance to try a Tim Tam, their little chocolate biscuit that they have, those are the best things.
So clearly, this guy has got better taste buds than that other couple that I just mentioned because he quite liked meat pies. So there's one vote for meat pies. And someone has done the right thing and introduced him to the Tim Tam. So if you watched the video before this, the young guy was a little bit confused and he was referring to Australian food as being things like tropical fruits that most places you wouldn't even see them, and things that I would not consider as being Australian, um, including vanilla bean ice cream, which is not exactly standard Australian food, whereas this guy seems to have got the notion that Australian food is your pav, your meat pie, and your Tim Tam. That's pretty ochre.
So good. It was hard for you to get a response if you'd say, "Hey, how are you?" in American accent, or "How are you doing?" on the street. But if you say, "Hey, how you going?" or even "How you going, mate?" right? They would answer usually.
I'm so grateful that this guy didn't do some really bad attempt at impersonating the Australian accent in saying that. I found it interesting that he's saying that the way he was saying, asking people how you going, that they didn't get it, but the moment he said how you going, they did. It could just be an accent thing. I know he clearly was in sort of far north areas, and there are some people with really broad Australian accents there, so perhaps his accent was somewhat different and they just didn't quite get what he was saying.
One thing I noticed in Sydney was they're very laid back. You know, there's a lot of stressful things that we encounter in life, but one of the things that they would always like to say is, should be all right, should be okay. And they just keep going and they just be relaxed about it. And they really like that about us, a person as well. If they can go in there and they can talk with them on the street in a relaxed way, like friend to friend. If you go up to them all tense, then they're kind of like, "What's your deal? Just calm down." Life is about being calm. So that's something I admired about their culture.
Yep, we're a pretty laid back bunch here. I'm glad that he appreciates that. And were he to learn how to be laid back, he might be able to say, "She'll be right," as opposed to "she'll be alright," because we don't say that.
They just pretty much expect people to be courteous, generally speaking. I noticed driving in Australia, people were really, really fair on the roads. They want you to wave and say thank you, but they let you in when you need to get in. They let you out when you need to get out.
Unless, of course, you're trying to drive in Tasmania, where so many Tasmanian drivers will do their best to close the gap so that you can't get in. If you are trying to merge into a lane, they will accelerate to stop you from doing so. And they will do all they can to remain king of the road. So, yeah, most other states do get the concept of having a bit of decent manners on the road, but in Tasmania, yeah, chances are you're going to get wiped out if you expect people to actually allow you into a spot on the road in front of them. Um, I've been in Victoria for 6 years, and I still have times when my sister accuses me of driving like a Tasmanian. In other words, not going straight into a roundabout until I am absolutely certain that the vehicles off to the right of me actually are going to stop and give way to me, or not pulling out of an intersection until I am certain that the vehicles that are oncoming are actually going to give way to me, or allowing extra room before I pull out of an intersection and onto a street, so that I don't have a vehicle come running up behind me and threaten to run into me simply for pulling onto that road. Because in Tasmania, if you try to pull out onto a street and there's a car coming up further back, even if there is plenty of room for you to turn in and to get up to the same speed as the traffic, chances are there's going to be some knob who decides to accelerate and get up on your bumper bar because they don't like the fact that you're now in front of them. It is interesting that he is talking about this in the context of like Sydney, because for most Australians, Sydney driving is crazy. So that really says something about driving in America.
Australia Day, that was a different holiday. Not used to having that. They're very patriotic on that day.
Yeah, right. So patriotic that either, I think it was Woolies, decided that, hey, we're not selling any Australian flag merchandise for Australia Day because it's not profitable. Yeah, we're not really patriotic. People might buy Australian flag stuff for Australia Day just because it's in their face at the reject shop or whatever, but we really don't give a rat's ass, basically, most of us. Sure, it's nice to have a public holiday, and a lot of people will have a barbecue with friends and family. Some people, depending on where they are in Australia, might head to the beach. But when you think of patriotic in terms of the way that Americans consider patriotism, we're just not that at all, ever.
Sydney's a really unique and I think it's a really beautiful city, really nice. Their beaches are something that a lot of people really like. You'll see a lot of families that just immediately go straight to the beach right after work or school, and they'll stay there till the end of the day. And the next day they'll go to work and they'll do the same thing the next day. They love it.
Okay, so clearly he was in a coastal area around Sydney, because for most people that's not going to happen. I'd imagine just the driving time alone would make it not worth it, so you would have to be living pretty much on the beach. So if anyone from, Sydney, New South Wales area can just fill me in on what sort of area he might have been at for him to experience this kind of culture. I know that there are places on the east coast of Tasmania where a lot of the kids on the really warm days will finish school and then go to the beach for an hour or so before, settling in for the evening. So I would imagine that come summer there probably are families in coastal areas of New South Wales, who do spend a lot of time during summer going to the beach after school. You've got the nice long hours of sunlight, so you've got all those hours after school to be able to go to the beach. But at the same time, let's be realistic and let's make sure that we're not saying that that is stereotypical, that is only people in coastal regions, and again, that wouldn't be a majority of people in coastal regions. I think he's just encountered people in a particular area and presumed that maybe because a handful of people do that, that's what Australian families in Sydney do.
There's cool buildings, the Opera House. You get to see that on Finding Nemo when the fish pops up out of the water. That one's a cool one to walk by. Hyde Park in the city is a nice big park that they have there. Sydney's a pretty safe place. They are generally really nice people. I mean, the only person that ever tried to take anything from me, trying to rob me, and I didn't even know it. So I don't think that there's very much of a threat there as far as crime goes. Of course, you have some areas where it's worse, some areas where it's better. There's a lot of trains, a lot of buses.
This guy is pretty level-headed, I'll give him that. And yeah, Sydney is a safe place. Most of Australia is a safe place to be. And I guess compared to some places in the USA, then that would stand out. I found it fascinating him talking about how one person tried to steal from him or rob from him or something, but he didn't even realise, so that doesn't count. I'd love to know exactly what the story is behind that. And certainly I think we are blessed to have such a good public transport infrastructure in the majority of capital cities in Australia.
And there's a place called Coffs Harbour. It's very beautiful.
Coffs Harbour is very beautiful, but I wonder if he realises that Coffs Harbour isn't Sydney, because he's been talking about Sydney, and then he just throws in, and there's a place called Coffs Harbour that's really, really beautiful. So perhaps he didn't mean it that way, but I'm sure that people from overseas are going to listen to that and think Coffs Harbour is part of Sydney.
Definitely have a lot of different phrases that they use that are hard to get used to. Instead of saying how you doing a lot, they go down the road and say how you going. Sometimes it throw you off a little bit. You're not sure what they're asking. They say heaps when they want to say a lot. So they say I just had heaps of food today, so I'm full.
That's an interesting observation, talking about how we say heaps for things. Is that not something that is used anywhere in America? Or is it just not something that is used in the part of America where he comes from? It just seems like such normal everyday language to me that it doesn't seem like a colloquialism.
They call the trunk of a car a boot. They call a hood a bonnet. Instead of windshield, it's windscreen. So there's just a few things like that that you have to be aware of. There's some people that live out in the bush that have a little bit of a stronger accent. It's just more of a strong accent, I would say. A lot of the times for mealtime, they call it tea time, which is kind of random. We're not having tea or anything, but it's just kind of what they do.
I find it fascinating when I do hear people pointing out language differences like this. Things that we take for granted as regular everyday language, but that when people visit Australia, they think, well, that's a really bizarre way of saying it or an odd way of saying it.
I'm just so grateful for everything that I learned with you, and I'm grateful for the people that you are. I have a lot of faith and a lot of confidence in all of you, and pray that we'll be able to continue to be good friends.
I think this guy has been quite polite and quite accepting, which is a great thing for anyone who's come to Australia. He's been fairly perceptive. He's not come across with anything that's totally way out there that's going to create some new, random, ridiculous stereotype. At the same time, though, I do get that kind of vibe of them or him feeling that he comes from a better culture than us. And I'm not sure why I do, because it's not in anything that he's said. Perhaps it is just that it could be that I have the knowledge that this is a guy who was sent to Australia as a missionary, which to me just seems like an odd thing. That's like saying, well, Australians are just heathens, so we're going to send people from America to teach them how to be good Christians or to be good Mormons, which that rubs me up the wrong way because our culture is so very different from American culture. So I don't know if there is a bit of a patronising tone to the things that he's saying, or if it is just me perceiving it as patronising, knowing what his work was when he came here to Australia. I'd love to know what other people think about this, and I'd love to know what people think about this in comparison to the previous video if you've watched that video. I'll leave the link for that below if you want to go and have a look at it. But anyway, thanks for watching. I definitely appreciate people taking the time to watch these videos all the way through. Please hit the like button. If you're not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe and leave a comment below. What are your thoughts on the things that I've talked about in this video?